Okay. How are we doing tonight, everybody? Welcome to the Rowan Ridge Friday night farm stream. And my name is Stephen Reichert. If we have not met before, I am the pretend farmer with the bozo looking glasses who raises some heritage pigs in western New Hampshire. We're breeding them and raising them as much as we can the old fashioned way out on the pasture. And I am really excited to talk to you guys tonight because we have some new developments in the food freedom topic. And that may be a new discussion for some of you folks. So I'm going to start out by kind of giving you the lay of the land, what the status quo is in terms of inspection and regulations for processing meat. I know that similar types of regulatory hurdles exist for all kinds of products and produce that are sold in small farms, but this is something that is very near and dear to me because, of course, I raise pigs. And while I don't do a lot personally with selling pork, my main focus on this farm is producing piglets for other small farmers and homesteaders who are in the pork business. So technically speaking, I am in pork, but I am downstream of where a lot of folks are at because I'm the one providing the piglets, but my customers are all small farmers and homesteaders who want to have the option to raise their own meat for themselves, of course, but also to be able to open up their doors from a commercial standpoint to be able to make money and sell some of their pork to other people. So, the way things have been since the 1960s or so, when LBJ, it was the end of the 1960s, when Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was a absolute dumpster fire of a president, in my humble opinion, and I make no apologies for that position, he enacted a piece of legislation called the Wholesome Food Act, which basically mandated that everything be inspected federally if it was going to be sold by the cut in the way that we all know and understand kind of retail, the way we go out to buy meat in the grocery store, right? When you go out to the grocery store, you get a pound of bacon and you get a package of pork chops. They don't all come from the same animal, which is the reason why you can buy 5 pounds of bacon or 10 pounds of bacon and you can buy a whole bunch of ribs. Whereas if you're buying a whole hog, well, the ribs are going to be one side and then the bacon is going to be the other side. There's limits, right? Because it's coming from the same animal. That's the way that most small farmers sell their pigs. And if you haven't yet, I will put in the description for this video the latest video that I made actually talking about what kind of numbers you can expect when you go and buy a pig directly from a small farmer. And I, of course, put in the numbers that kind of the prices and the yield and the time frame and all of those questions that a lot of folks have when we're talking about um, buying a whole hog, because for a lot of folks it's a very different experience. I know for myself, I mean, I've been doing this for 5 years, and at this point I'm so immersed in farming and pigs and pork and the way everything works that I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. But not that long ago I had no concept of this, and I was rurally and conservatively minded in that, I always considered myself, I spent a lot of time outdoors. I grew up in a rural area with farms down the road, ate a lot of meat. I even lived on a farm in a religious cult at one point, and it never really hit home to me the amount of regulation that is involved in taking a animal that's on the hoof and breaking it down into a retail item or a bunch of retail items, right? Cuts of meat, and being able to sell them to people. And once I started doing that myself, it really frustrated me because there's so many regulations that once you actually get involved, you begin to realize that the regulations don't actually serve to protect people from anything. The regulations actually serve to protect the massive megacorps that have the corner on the market, that own the farms, the farmers, they own the slaughterhouses, they own the trucking, they own the feed companies, they own everything, and they have everything siloed. And the regulatory nonsense that's passed in the government on a federal level, it doesn't actually do anything to put a damper on their profits. What it really does is it creates hurdles that small farmers can't compete with. And so over the years, something that I mention a lot on these live streams, you have a lot of small farms that go under, go out of business because there's more money in just selling the farm, letting them put a data center on it, and then, hey, you know what, it's been a good run, but it's just not viable for the small family farm to really compete because all the market share has been captured by the mega farms, the Purdue's, Tyson, Cargill, Mountain Air, Pilgrim's Pride in the world of poultry, right? There's a whole bunch of companies, actually not many, there's about 5 that really control the meat industry in the United States. And of course, Smithfield is a very large player in the pork industry, and that is owned by the Chinese. I believe JBS is Brazilian. So it's kind of a slap in the face when you go to the grocery store and you see all the, the creative imagery that captures a caricature of the American family farm, but actually it's owned by people who are not farmers, who have no interest or care, and really investment in the American farming community and the agricultural way of life. So when you have an animal, in order to sell it, if you are going to sell it the way that most people buy meat in the grocery store, which is, I just want a pound of bacon and then I'm going to go home. Most people don't go to the grocery store and buy an entire pig's worth of meat because, well, you don't necessarily have a chest freezer that you're going to devote, 7.5 cubic feet of freezer space to locking down. And so when most people think about buying farm fresh pork, they're thinking, okay, can I just get a pound of bacon? I want to test it, see what it's like. But when you're selling pork in whole hog or half hog increments, you kind of don't have the ability to offer normal people the convenience of, here's a little bit and come back when you need some more, because you have to complete the transaction with the entire animal. And technically, for legal purposes, and there's a lot of legalese tied up in this stuff, for legal purposes, if you want to buy a whole hog from me, what I'm actually doing is I'm selling you the animal while it's alive, and then I'm raising it for you, but it's your pig. And then when it gets slaughtered on the farm, which is far and away the most humane and the best way to process meat, and I'm going to interview my butcher, who is a very interesting guy, has a wealth of experience outside of what he does with butchery. But just to kind of clarify some of the benefits of on-farm slaughter versus loading your animals up on a trailer, taking them to a slaughterhouse where they're going to be put in with groups of animals where they're completely out of their element, very uncomfortable. They get stressed being in transportation, also in an unfamiliar environment, and you can't vouch for the way the animals are being treated, even if they're not being treated badly. And I'm not saying that every USDA slaughterhouse is, represented by, the Netflix documentaries that go on at length about the horrors that some of those slaughterhouses certainly have been accused credibly of doing. But basically, your animal is under a lot more stress right before it is slaughtered, which then leads to perhaps only a little bit, but it is still a decrease in the quality that the meat is going to have, because the animal has more stress hormones in its system at the time that it's slaughtered. On the farm, the animal is going about its daily business, lights are turned off, and your animal is, and you can see the whole process, and you can be there and you know what's going on, and you can actually visually inspect the carcass. You can see what it looks like. There's a lot more transparency from a farmer's side being able to do it this way. But what you give up by having that humane on-farm slaughter and instead having to opt for USDA inspection, under USDA inspection, those cuts are eligible to be sold in stores. You can sell them a pound of bacon to one person, a pound of bacon to somebody completely different, and that expands your market a lot. So there's a lot of people here locally who are very interested in the pork that I raise, but for a lot of them, having to get a chest freezer with the requisite space to contain a whole or even a half a hog, which is still a decent amount of space, and also having to pay the money up front because you're buying an entire pig's worth of cuts. You're not just buying a pound of bacon, you're buying all of the bacon from both sides of the animal. You're buying all the pork chops, all the ribs, all the sausage, all the hams. And so the financial output, it's a lot more, you feel it a lot more when you're buying the entire thing up front. And so a lot of people ultimately are choosing to just opt out and say, you know what, I'm just going to go to, buy a pound at the grocery store, and that's going to be that for now. So this is all due to federal regulations that LBJ put in back in the 60s, which was called the Wholesome Foods Act. And it was basically meant to give people a feeling of safety that their meat is all held to the same standard, that you're not getting any low quality, poorly treated, sick animals that are being processed and then sold to you as being viable or acceptable when they're actually below what the standard should be. And as with so many things that we see in our society and our culture, we have the road to hell. It's paved with good intentions. And what this federal legislation did, it basically made it harder for small farms and small farmers to be able to turn a profit, selling their animals using local butchers and operating at a smaller scale. And so that's kind of the current status quo. I made a video, actually the highest performing video that I ever made almost a year ago, was about why small farmers, is titled Why Small Farmers Can't Make a Profit in 2026. I updated the title for the sake of the algorithm. It was actually originally done in 2025, of course. And that was all about the complexities of having to deal with the USDA mandate in order to sell pork the way that it's sold in the grocery store by the retail cut rather than the entire animal. So New Hampshire, and I am the first person to tell you, I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I do like New Hampshire, and I'm going to have to move my chair over here because I feel like I'm sitting a little bit crooked. There we go. I think that's better. New Hampshire, I got a lot of wonderful things to say about New Hampshire. I was not born in New Hampshire. I am a refugee, as I tell people, from upstate New York, where I was born. And so I'm not one to sugarcoat things. There are things that New Hampshire really leads the way in. There are other things where New Hampshire is a little bit silly, the way that they do some things, in my opinion. But I have to say, I am very deeply impressed by the piece of legislation that we're going to be talking about tonight, which is the House Bill 396 that has just been passed by the state Senate and is going to the governor's desk. And that is going to do something that is pretty substantial, because this bill gives farmers, and there's a few different versions of the bill. There's one that was amended in the state Congress, and then there's another one that was amended in the state Senate. And so, as far as I have been able to deduce from what I have read, the governor is going to have some opportunity to request amendments to the language, because there's a couple different versions of the bill, but basically what they do is they allow for farmers to sell meat that has been custom processed, meaning not at a USDA facility, but meat that has been slaughtered on the farm and um, processed by a custom butcher that is not federally inspected, but that can now be sold within the state of New Hampshire. So intra-state. So I don't have the option now that this legislation has passed to do like mail order bacon where, hey, I'm allowed to just process the bacon myself and package it up with some ice and put it on a UPS truck and there's your bacon. Can't do that. But what it means is that I can process one of my pigs and I can sell a pound of bacon to one of my neighbors, and I can sell the pork chops to another one of my neighbors, and I can sell some sausage to somebody across town because everybody is within the state of New Hampshire. And so we're not relying or forced by the federal government to rely on USDA inspection. And that means that it is much easier for me now to get meat processed and to fill my freezer with my own pork that I can then turn around and sell individual cuts to people within my state and within my community. And the idea is that the federal oversight is a little bit overkill. Frankly, it's tyrannical for a federal agency to have the jurisdiction to say that I am not allowed to process an animal that I raised on my property to my neighbors who are able to come and verify the cleanliness, the condition, the standards at which I am raising these animals, and that the federal government basically knows better and is going to keep everybody under their thumb. And so, as you can imagine, this is not a small step. I mean, this is kind of a big gesture in thumbing their nose on some level at the federal government and at the USDA, which is a significant regulatory body, and saying, we believe that we can do it better in-house. And there are some provisions within the bill. So it's not a blank check, hey, small farms, like you can just cut the USDA out of the loop and let your hair down and do whatever seems good to you. It's not quite that permissive, but what it does offer, it is for farmers that are not doing more than 3 cows a month, 5 pigs a month, and I believe 10 sheep a month. So for me to have 5 pigs a month that I would be sending to the butcher, that's a pretty significant throughput, and I am nowhere near exceeding that limit. And so I think it's a very, very encouraging and a very good step. We still have to get the legislation signed by the governor, and we have to see what sort of provisions and changes that she may request because it's not technically the law yet. But the fact that this was done is really encouraging because there's a handful of other states that have done similar things, but they're all a little bit more delicate. They're a little bit more careful in the freedom that they're allowing to the farmers. And so what House Bill 396 does, it allows me to sell custom butchered, non-USDA inspected meat to other stores that can then in turn resell my meat. There are other states that have, and I'll go through, I looked up a bunch of stuff about other states, their legislation. I have it written down on my phone, and I'll scroll through that at some point here. But yeah, I'm just looking in the chat here. I see Anna, sorry, I remember that, and Mike in the chat here. Will you announce its signing when it gets there? Absolutely. I will be very happily, possibly literally shouting it from the rooftops when this happens, because New Hampshire is really like going out on a limb doing this kind of legislation, because there's other similar types of legislation from other states that are trying to kind of open the door um, but they don't have like the ability to sell to a store with custom processing. So, for example, there are other states that will allow you to get stuff custom processed and then sell retail cuts, but you can't sell retail cuts to a store who will then buy a bunch of your cuts, like a whole bunch of your bacon, and then turn around and sell your bacon in their store, which still places a significant handicap on small farmers. But New Hampshire has made it so that we can sell custom processed meat, or they're about to, once it's signed. I should be careful in saying this because it's not there already. Hey, good evening, Sean. Good to see you here in the chat, always with the long and in-depth, insightful analysis in the comments. Good to see you here, sir, in the live stream. And yes, guys, if you haven't already, please do like the stream. That'll help get the word out, get more people in here. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel because that's going to help us build what we are doing here, get momentum as we work to make America farmers again. If you're able to take a bozo who wears these kind of glasses seriously when we're talking about rural life and agricultural topics, I know it's a stretch, but I would ask you guys to do that and like the stream. So what New Hampshire is doing, they're opening the door for non-USDA meat to pretty much be unregulated, unlimited within state boundaries. And this is huge because this opens the door for other states that have similar legislation but weaker versions for people in other states to go to their state representatives and say, hey, why can't we push the envelope a little bit further? And there has been a decent amount of pushback from political folks. And I want to take a brief moment to recently, I have been, I feel like a lot of people who follow this channel have been tolerant of, at best, or in some cases, not very happy with my taking to task the Trump administration for their involvement in foreign conflicts. But I am proud to say, and I'm not a registered Republican, but as somebody who typically has voted with Republicans a lot in the past, that all of the state reps who sponsored this bill, and there's a whole bunch of them, both in the Senate and in the State House in New Hampshire, all Republicans, and they will absolutely be getting my full support when the next election cycle comes around, because this is really tangible and beneficial, and it makes it feasible for small farmers to actually get some traction, to make some money, where now people getting into farming in the state of New Hampshire have the ability to get their animals processed where they want, when they want, and sell that meat to people in their community, where you don't have to tell somebody, hey, I'm sorry, I can only sell you the animal if you can afford to pay for the entire animal up front and get a chest freezer to store it. But rather you can say, hey, you know what? Start off with a pound of bacon, see if you like it. If it's worth it, you come back and you're able to reach a much wider audience, and it's much more convenient. And to put a finer point on it, the USDA processing, there's only 4 USDA processors in the state of New Hampshire. I know there are other states. I believe I had a fellow in here in the live streams previously who was in Arizona or New Mexico, and they did not have any USDA processors. So imagine you're in a state like that where you don't have access to any USDA processors within your state. And then, well, how are you supposed to sell your pork and make any money off of it? Smithfield Pork is shipping all their products to every Dollar General all over the place. Doesn't affect them because they're raising, probably they're processing maybe 5,000-10,000 hogs a month, and they're shipping that pork all over the country, even the world. No problem for them. They can still get pork into your state, right? But if you're raising it there, what are you supposed to do? And so what happens is, when you're relying on the USDA processors, everything becomes bottlenecked around processing. And so I will have, and I experience this even as a breeder, because again, this is one of the reasons why I chose not to really get too involved in selling pork, because there's a lot of logistics involved and you got to get the timing right. It's like sinking a putt from a long way away, because when you're deciding to raise your piglets, you have to make sure that you have the right amount, that they're growing well, that nobody accidentally kicks the bucket. Because going to a USDA processor, you have to have the right amount, because a lot of USDA processors, they're not going to even take your call if you don't have more than the minimum number of animals to make it worth their while. And because the USDA facilities are much bigger and they are much more expensive to set up and to run, they don't want to bother with bozos from New Hampshire with a couple of pigs here and there. And when I say, oh, you know what, I think I need to cull this sow, let me call up the local USDA plant, they say, that's nice. You need to have 4 more in order to meet the 5 hog minimum. And well, maybe I don't have 5 pigs that I want to get rid of. So I have to keep the one, or I have to do non USDA and then I have to pay the penalty and not be able to sell it and piecemeal it out and make money off of it, at least in the short term, as much as I could, if I had the ability to sell those cuts the way that we now are going to be able to do within state lines. And so people buying piglets in the spring, now, if they're going through the USDA, they did, once this is signed into law, they did have to know exactly when their butcher date was. So when they call me in the fall to secure piglets, they need to have their piglets by a specific date, because they've already scheduled a date with the USDA butcher shop so that they can sell their meat in their farm store or at the farmer's market that they're going to. And if my piglets don't arrive until later, or I have a bad farrowing season and mama squashes a bunch of the babies, and I say, hey, I'm sorry, can you wait another month or two and I'll get your piglets out of an upcoming litter, because I'm kind of SOL here. I don't really have any piglets available for you right now. They're going to have to go somewhere else, and they're not coming back because they have a butcher date and they can't alter that. They can't call up the USDA shop and say, hey, you know what, had a bad run of luck here with my farrowing. Can we just move this date a couple weeks up? Not an option. USDA is going to say no. And the next time they call that USDA shop, it's going to be like, nah, no, sorry, we're busy. We can't take your business, because the USDA shops, in order to maintain their overhead, they have to have a significant volume that is steadily coming in there. And there's a lot of homesteaders and farmers within New Hampshire that want USDA processing, certainly, but not enough to pay the bank notes on a USDA facility. So those USDA shops, what do they do to make sure they're getting enough animals coming through their freezers? They're getting animals from out of state. So they'll have animals coming from Pennsylvania, from Ohio, from Indiana, from Illinois, and those animals are coming from bigger farms where they have a little bit more of a regular schedule, and kind of like medium-sized farms in many cases, because they're still not doing processing for Smithfield and the big companies. They own their own processing facilities and the public has no access to it. I can't go and call up Smithfield and say, excuse me, Mr. Smithfield, can I have a butcher date for my 5 hogs? I meet the minimum. They're not taking calls from the public. They're just doing their own stuff there, and they own the entire operation. When you think about the amount of money that is tied up in farm business that is so big that they own the feed, they own the farms that grow the feed, they own all the equipment that produce all that feed, they own the trucking, they own the butchering and the processing, they own the refrigeration that then distributes the finished product. Like, it is a staggering amount of centralization and control that is absolutely unacceptable. I would argue is fundamentally un-American in terms of what it represents and the control and the leverage that it exerts on the American public. Again, we take a little ride in the Wayback Machine to the time of the former pandemic, which I know some people have been rumbling a little bit about the possibility of another one with the another respiratory situation going on. And I'm not going to get too deep into that unless you distract me by asking questions in the chat. It has happened before. I can be distracted. I will put that out there. But the fact that a processor says, yeah, we're not running this plant in this area, and so now too bad you don't have chicken wings, you don't have beef, you can't have more than 1 or 2 steaks in your cart when you go to check out, and you're out of options because everything is centralized and controlled. This is one of the reasons why it is literally a national security issue for us to be able to have control of our local food supplies. And I am proud of the fact that New Hampshire has really taken a very forward stand, because we can compare this to what's going on in the world, or what has already taken place in the world of marijuana. So marijuana is still federally illegal, I think. Um, I haven't heard anything about it that I've paid attention to, anyways. But marijuana is still, as far as I know, federally illegal. And so, in theory, the feds can zip down a rope out of a helicopter, fast rope into your driveway, kick your door down if you're growing marijuana in one of the states where it is legal, even though the state is not going to give you up or facilitate that. They can't stop the feds from enforcing federal law. And this is one of the most American things, where we have a state going against the federal law and saying, we know better what's better for our community, and we are going to set up our own regulations and our own rules. So the House Bill 396 here in New Hampshire, as I mentioned, it has to be intrastate. So I can't sell bacon to somebody who's going back to Vermont with it. I can't sell mail order bacon, like Butcher Box or Moink Box or whatever. There's, you've heard some of those that sponsor other popular podcasts and shows. We can't do that kind of sales. And I think it kind of makes sense, because the whole point of prioritizing local processing is where we're able to get local butchers who aren't backed up taking truckloads of pigs from Indiana, that those local butchers who serve their local community can butcher local animals and sell it to local people. It's a win-win for everything, strengthens the local food economy, which is something that has been missing for a long time. Now, we are going to talk a little bit about the Prime Act, which is a federal version of pretty much, although it's even weaker than House Bill 396, but it is a nod in that direction. It's a look in the right direction. And so this is really encouraging, because it is a cracking the door open. And a lot of states have, between the lobbying and the legislation and different interest groups that are running the different states, it's hard to get somebody who is willing to put their, and more, even less so, a group of somebodies who are willing to put their name on something that says, listen, federal government, thanks, but no thanks. Stay in your lane. We're going to do our own thing. So, intrastate sales of meat only. And then there is a limitation on how many animals you can process: 5 pigs, 3 cows, 10 sheep per month in order to qualify. Now, there are a couple of different versions of the bill, and we are not sure which one is going to be the one that the governor chooses to sign into law when, hopefully, she does this, because this entire piece of legislation was all pushed by state Republicans. The governor's a Republican. Presumably, she will act in a way that is beneficial to agriculture and the rural communities within the state that I know supported her, as Governor Kelly Ayotte, if I'm saying her name correctly. If not, sorry, it's French, so can't really ask me to have too much expertise in the pronunciation. But there's a couple of different versions of the bill. One requires that you label the bill as, one requires that you label the meat as being non-USDA inspected. So there's full disclosure to the person buying it, and you can sell to restaurants, stores, Airbnbs, or direct to consumers in your community. So that's a pretty broad brush in terms of who you can sell this non-USDA inspected meat to, and especially being able to sell to stores. So my good friend Kent and his wife Lisa, they own a small farm store called Owl's Nest, I think Owl's Nest Farm Store, and they have an Airbnb, which is beautiful. It's a little tree house that Kent built. Kent is the guy who helped me stand up and set up my grain bin, which I have a video that I'm going to be doing about that soon, because today was the first time that it was the maiden voyage for this grain bin that was sitting on a trailer all winter while I waited for the snow around it to melt so that I could move the trailer and stand it up. And what a process that was. But now I can have one of my pigs butchered. I can keep cuts for myself. I can give Kent and Lisa, or sell Kent and Lisa some, and they can turn around and they can sell their friend's bacon in their store without it requiring a year's worth of logistical preparation. But it's just, hey, I am going to be butchering half of the pig. I'm keeping some. Do you want some of this bacon? It gives me the ability to make my own bacon. So one of the things that was a challenge previously when I am not currently butchering commercially, and I'm not curing my own bacon, butchering my own animals. I go to Doug the Butcher. I'm gonna interview him and put that video here um, on the channel for you guys to enjoy, because my butcher Doug, he is a real piece of work. He's former special forces guy and used to be Tucker Carlson's bodyguard. I hope that's okay for me to say that. But anyways, really cool guy, and I use him now for my butchering. So because I just don't have time to do my own butchering, but I had people who liked the way that I did my bacon and ham, even though I wasn't an expert, which probably meant that I cured it a little bit sweeter and saltier. It was a little more, had a little more zip to it when you would put it in the frying pan, because a lot of times if you're making bacon according to the recipes, which when you're doing a lot, you don't want to be putting in any more than you need to because you're paying for all of that seasoning. And I was only doing a couple of pigs a year. So I just did the ham, brined it myself, did the bacon with a dry rub, and vac sealed it, let it cure, went through the whole process. But I had some people who really liked my bacon. The problem was I had to tell them, well, this is not USDA inspected, so unfortunately, you can't sell my bacon in your store, even though you have a little farm store and I'm a little farm. We're not able to do business that way. And even if I get my meat slaughtered in a USDA shop, because my facility is not USDA inspected, I can't take USDA slaughtered side of pork belly and make bacon in my own shop that you can then turn around and resell. Sorry, can't do that because it requires USDA inspection. And now that is gone once House Bill 396 gets signed into law. Again, great for national security, food freedom. New Hampshire is really leading the way because this is the most permissive bit of legislation that puts the most control in the hands of small farmers and local government. And so let me just jump in the chat here because I know I missed a few chats. Bolino's Bounty and Sean. Sean says, USDA butchers near me in New Jersey. Specialty meats, last few years, they've become busier than ever and have to schedule almost 6 months in advance. That's not even that bad. I mean, a lot of the places around here, it's like a year, 18 months that you have to get in there in order to get stuff done. And that's hard enough if you have a handful of animals, but it's even harder because there's only one place where you can bring in like one and get it USDA processed. That's Adams in Massachusetts, and I've heard very, very good things. But a place that does a real good job and is very user friendly, it's also very, very high demand, and that is that's part of the game. But House Bill 396 is going to alleviate that pressure so that small farmers with small amounts of animals are going to have the same economic opportunities to benefit from selling their meat locally. And we're going to create a lot more opportunity for people locally to eat meat that is farmed in their own community instead of having to buy stuff from Dollar General, because what else are you going to do, right? Um, yeah, there's not enough USDA shops, and that's really the rationale for this. And there were some, if I might be so bold as to speak my mind here, some of the candy ass regulatory pencil pushers in the state of New Hampshire who were fighting against this. And I won't mention names specifically, but it's kind of sad to see how afraid people are, where they want, please govern me harder, daddy. Like, we're not going to be safe if these unscrupulous farmers are able to sell their diseased meat without the federal government coming in and telling them how to do it properly. It's like the whole thing is so transparently a ploy to put their federal oar in the water to stop small farmers, because they act like they're concerned about hate speech. They act like they're concerned about firearms. And yes, they definitely want to control what you can say and how you can defend yourself. No question about that. But when it really comes right down to it, they're afraid of people who don't care what they think, not people who are going to go out of their way to be aggressive and violent and, try to knock down the system. What they're really concerned about is that people will realize that they can just click their ruby slippers together and just say, hey, there's no place like home. I don't need you anymore. I'm just going to grow my own food and raise my family and do my own thing. And hey, have a nice day. I don't need it. I'm just going to go do my own thing, kind of like the Amish. And the Amish have figured that out. And a society of people who are not willing to be dependent on the government to meet all of their needs and to inspect their milk and their meat, those are people that are really hard to govern, because they just do it themselves and they're not waiting for somebody to come roll it out and hand it to them on a silver platter. And once people start to realize how simple that is, I'm not going to say easy, it is not easy, but simple it is, they don't want that. They don't want that. So, again, my hat is literally and figuratively off to the Republicans in the state of New Hampshire, both in the House and the Senate, that pushed this piece of legislation through, because it is a big, maybe a tactful middle finger to the federal government, but it is definitely challenging the federal authority to micromanage what we do and how we feed our own selves. And boy, it is beautiful and refreshing. So I'm going to hop in the chat here. I'll stop ranting for a second. I know I missed a bunch of chats here. Sean says, well, Mike says, I know a certain New Jersey resident what would be upset if there isn't enough gabagool. Sean says, support local butchers. I just had a mobile butcher. Do 2 hogs, didn't have to do anything but send instructions, very efficient. The Big Beautiful Bill is sitting on Capitol Hill. We'll talk about the Big Beautiful Bill in a second. But yeah, the benefit to a farmer, excuse me, a frog in my throat, non-USDA infected frog, or inspected, maybe both infected and inspected. The benefit to the farmer is immense, because loading animals is super irritating and stressful for the farmer unless you have everything perfectly set up and you do this a lot. And it's also somewhat stressful for the animals, because baked into that cake with what you're doing with sending them to USDA processing facility, you're putting them on a trailer and transporting them, which is stressful. And then you're having them transported hungry into a facility where they're with a bunch of animals that they don't know, in a space that's not familiar. They can't relax. All of that is really not good. I would go as far as saying, and I am no vegan, but I don't put the time and the effort into my animals that I do because I don't care about them. I my animals are friends until they are food. And we have a very clear understanding that ultimately, we got to pay the bigger ones, got to pay for the smaller ones that are coming behind. We got to keep the cycle going. But while you're here, you put a lot of effort into making sure that your animals are given excellent treatment, access to beyond the norm quality of food and forage, and then you're going to go back to the standard baseline and load them in a trailer and send them off to a big plant where you can't verify how they're being treated, how they're doing in terms of their like stress response. Compare that with, you call up your butcher that you have a personal relationship with, who knows your place, who knows how you do things. He comes and the animal is in its own natural environment, eating dinner, asleep even in some cases, and he just turns the lights out. It's that simple. It's respectful, it's clean, it is as humane as the slaughtering and butchering can possibly be. There's no comparison, even though, I am not saying that the USDA slaughterhouses are all run by villains. What I'm saying is that in a best case scenario, it's not able to meet the same ethical qualities and standards that a custom butcher, a mobile butcher who comes to your farm can meet. And it's frustrating as a farmer to put that much effort into making sure your animals are given the highest level of care and treatment during their life, and then have to go back down to the just generic normie baseline for the last and arguably the most impactful 24 to 48 hours of their life, because the stress and the hormones and dumped in the bloodstream, depending on how things go, of course. But still, it's not an ideal time for the animal to be stressed out. And there's no way to avoid having them stressed out when you have them kind of smashed in with a bunch of other animals. It is what it is. And so, yeah, I'm very, very encouraged and excited about this. Good evening, Craig. Good to see you here. Lord of the Ree. What's up, world champions? Hope I'm not too terribly late. Well, the good news is that I took some of that burden off you by starting a little bit late, so I kind of offset. So by extension, you're not very late. Secret Noise Picture says, I really hope the upside down state adapts to the same. And yeah, I would agree. Maine has actually done some similar legislation, but they haven't gone quite as far. And so New Hampshire is the first one to really, as far as I know, because there's other states that will allow. I think what Maine has done is they've made it a town issue. So the state, basically what they're trying to do is run away from the judgment of the federal overlords, so that this way, if a town, they give the towns the jurisdiction to be able to do different things differently within them, but the it's a little bit more restrictive than what we have here. It's kind of going in the same direction, but it's not a statewide um, legislation that says farmers do not have to abide by the federal regulation, as long as, and there were a couple of restrictions in House Bill 396, and there's again different versions of this that, as far as I know, will both be presented to the governor, and she's going to ultimately decide which one she's going to sign, or if she needs to amend it further. I know that they were going to require farmers to basically sign a waiver that says, listen, we're going to look the other way on this, but if you get busted by the feds, don't send them our way, because that was your choice to sell non-USDA inspected meats. And I'm 100% willing to sign such a waiver, although that was in the first round. And the second round, they also wanted there to be labeling on there that designated it as non-USDA inspected. And then there was a more recent version that was the one that the Senate sent to the governor that basically was going to have some language in there about food safety and vet inspection. Like there would be a yearly inspection on your farm. You would have to register with the New Hampshire Bureau of Agriculture. So they want to know who's making use of this legislation and selling meat. And then you would have to have your farm visited yearly by a vet to inspect it. And then there would also be a requirement to take a food safety class or have some food safety education. These are all kind of amendments to the language that may or may not be in the final iteration of this. So I'm not, I don't want to get too excited about New Hampshire, really going rogue and sticking it to the feds, because there's still plenty of oversight that I would say is a little bit excessive, but still, I would rather take a food safety course and have a vet come to the farm and show them what I'm doing, and maybe I can learn a thing or two from them. And it would be, you know, it's not the end of the world. There still is going to be a little bit of, there's still going to be some oversight in there, but it at least shifts the oversight from the federal regulatory bodies and shifts that into the state and the locality, where we have a little bit more of a rapport and we can address some of that stuff if it becomes problematic. And I don't know that all of those caveats that I just listed about the regulations and inspections and signing up with different bureaus, I think those were included in the first version of the bill that went from the House to the Senate. I believe those were largely removed in the Senate, and then they're going to send it to the governor for her to sign, and then presumably she's going to sign it or maybe make some amendments. Secret noise pictures, yeah, upside down state. My hope is that this, number one, encourages other states to start pushing back, because this is the exact same. I mean, this is synonymous with what happened with marijuana. That California was the first one, and they were the big, they pushed the envelope on this, and then Colorado was the second one. And ever since Colorado and California, it's like, okay, well, now it's, it stopped becoming a fringe issue, and more and more and more states now have legal marijuana within the state. And of course, each state has different regulations on that industry, but it's not prohibited based on a federal declaration. And I see this being a turning point for the food freedom movement, which over the years has gotten to this point because of dissident voices like Joel Salatin, who, again, I don't necessarily consider him my Lord and Savior, but in the world of food freedom, the guy has done some really significant things, and he has pushed this envelope starting decades ago to get it to this point where now New Hampshire is planting that flag in the ground and saying, okay, this is where the line is now. And hopefully other states will start to do this. I think a lot of it is going to come down, unfortunately, as it frequently does, it's going to come down to lobbying dollars and various political influences and campaigns within the state, because they don't limit their expenditures to just federal employees and federal offices. They do get into the states. And so ultimately, we got to make America farmers again, and more people have to start calling up their. And one thing I will tell you, I called my state rep when this bill was in the House, and I kind of know the guy because he lives like up the road from me. And I said, "What's the deal?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, it's going to go through." He was a farmer, and you know, he said, "Yeah, I think we got it. It'll should be good." But when you call up on the phone and you talk to the people in your local government, and a phone call counts for like 50 emails, and a phone call counts for like 1,000 tweets, right? Like the currency has different weights to it. And when you take the time to handwrite a letter or get on the phone and talk to somebody and say, hey, this needs to happen. Why aren't we doing this? They start getting phone calls. And maybe one of the things, once the channel grows, Lord willing, and if you guys aren't subscribed to the channel, subscribe so we can make America farmers again, because I have a whole lot of completely legal mischief planned, like being able to get people together and say, okay, what's the state that we need to target? And then let's all get on the horn and call the state representatives. We'll pick different ones. And it's like you go around and it's like, okay, we're going to campaign on this and we're going to put pressure on so they understand that there's a lot of people who care about this, and make them feel a little bit of the squeeze, a little bit of the leverage from people who want to be represented, because at the end of the day, everybody needs to eat. And the junk that we're currently being fed by the mega corps that are producing it, it should be illegal. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that if our founding fathers, I mean, hell, even the people who went and fought in World War I and II, if they understood the absolute excrement that is being fed to us and the way that that's being produced and the impact that that has had on our farms and our culture and our society, like the fact that you can't just be a farmer and make a living wage doing that anymore, like that has a tremendous impact on our culture. That's not just a matter of food safety and food supply locally, and that certainly is a big part of it, but that also, when you take farming out of the culture, we're removing a significant component of what made America America. And it's time for us to get in the game and start doing that. And this is, well, this is a good start. So I know Sean said earlier about the big, beautiful bill. So I want to shift gears for a moment and talk briefly about the Prime Act, because the Prime Act is a piece of legislation that was put forward, sponsored by Thomas Massey in the United States Congress. And basically, what the Prime Act does, it is by and large much weaker than House Bill 396, because it does not actually give permission to the states to allow X, Y, or Z. What it does is it basically says, hey, we're going to just suspend punishing people within a state, as long as we're just going to leave that to the states. Anything that's happening with intra-state meat sales, they can do it the way that they want to, and we're going to leave them alone. It doesn't actually grant any specific rights, as if that was a thing that you could or needed to grant rights to people to be able to feed themselves in their community. But here we are, right? So the Prime Act is just a suspension of judgment against states that are choosing to regulate their own non-USDA intra-state sale and production of meat and livestock. So it's honestly, it's kind of weak, but it's a start, and it's on the federal level. And so, as difficult as you can imagine it would be to get House Bill 396 pushed through in the state of New Hampshire and or in any other state, which hopefully this will grow from here. I think it's going to be, a lot taller of an order to be able to do something along those lines, but nationally at the federal level. Now, I'm going to try not to get too ranty here in the, talking about federal and national politics, but right now Thomas Massey is in the doghouse with His Highness the Orange Sultan of the United States, who I voted for and I supported up until the fact, like, Thomas Massey is a canary in the coal mine. I don't agree with all of his perspectives on all the things, right? Like, who agrees with anybody about anything or about everything, right? Like, there's always room to have differences of opinion, but he went after Thomas Massey blatantly and then put his support behind Ladybug Lindsey Graham, who is an absolute sack of dung. And to me, it's just like, if you want to know who somebody is, look at who their friends are. And talking about just restricting this conversation to people who are alive and did not own islands in the Caribbean at any point in time. Like, if you're going to be homies with Lindsey Graham and then say that Thomas Massey is some kind of a jerk and, make fun of him for not waiting long enough to get remarried after his wife died, like, that seems to be a theme that he did the same thing with Joe Kent, who is another, you know, agree or disagree. I don't necessarily know or agree with all of his opinions there, but the guy certainly is, 11 combat deployments. He's not exactly you know, a soft-handed pencil pusher. The guy was a door kicker, and he invested his life and ultimately lost his own wife. But anyways, yeah, so I think that Massey is facing an uphill battle because the GOP, which is always for the farmers, the GOP is largely following the Trumpkin, and whether or not it is based on their actual beliefs and their personal sentiment, or whether it's just, hey, I don't want to step out of line because if you're the hammer that's sticking up, you're going to get whacked. And so nobody wants to get on board with anything from Massey because he's currently, they're going to be doing the primary, or they're currently doing the primary, which I think 12 or 13 days is going to be the primary in his state. And of course, Trump backed Ed Gallrein, who is, um, well, he's no Thomas Massey, and he wouldn't even show up and debate Thomas Massey. And the guy is bankrolled by Miriam Adelson, who gave, like, why is an Israeli billionaire putting millions of dollars into a congressional race in Kentucky? Like, Israel and Kentucky, they're a long way away. It seems to me like, maybe, well, it should be something that should cause people to scratch their heads a little and say, maybe this is not the bill of goods that we were sold. And for me, Thomas Massey is the only guy in the federal government, at least visibly, that I'm aware of. And I'm sure there may be a handful of other people that I just don't know about because I don't spend a lot of my time focusing on broadly federal politics and that machine. But Thomas Massey is the only guy in the federal political world who has been sounding this alarm about, hey, the Prime Act needs to get passed because we need local farmers to produce local food with local butchers, and this is a whole, like, slice of the pie that is getting completely missed, and that's not okay, and we need to stand down and get out of the way so that that can happen. And my concern is that there are elements and factions within the GOP that will go against anything with Massey's name on it simply because it has Massey's name on it and he's in Trump's doghouse for the time being. But right now, also, things have kind of slowed down a little bit because there's a primary going on, and so we'll have to see what happens with it. But it has been doing pretty well. But the Prime Act is really, it's a much weaker version, even though it's federal. It's a much weaker version than what we got passed in New Hampshire. Into the chat. Bellino's Bounty. I'm reading back up a little ways here. I don't think they are afraid. I think they just hate the idea of small business. I think Lord of the Ree says, I think making and selling built dong sounds like fun. Bellino's Bounty says, yeah, afraid of small business and self-sufficiency. Lord of the Ree says, well, that's your problem right there. More like New Hampshire. Well, I don't know what Kelly Ayotte's affiliation is. I do know that given the alternative, yeah, I mean, hindsight is 2020, but at the end of the day, there's yeah, I don't know. I probably should be more involved with and more ear to the ground on local political stuff at this point. I, I'm going to vote with, generally speaking, within the state. I'm putting more of my focus there and trying to vote with the people that seem to have my general best interest in mind. Although it's hard to say because there are different issues, and you don't like on a federal level, the whole left right thing is usually a pretty easy like element based on which to separate people out and kind of say, okay, this is generally where I land. In the state, like the smaller the elections get, the nuances become more visible, and so it can be a little bit harder. But end of the day, uh, I suspect that the governor is gonna sign this, and I'm not gonna look a gift horse in the mouth, so to speak. If she signs this bill, I will be very happy for it, and I'll give her all the credit for doing that. Sean says they want us to eat bugs and lab grown meat. And I am hoping that the next thing that maybe we can start leaning on our state legislators to work on is to pass a ban on lab grown meat, because that's the next thing. Is we need to start kind of drawing some lines around what constitutes food versus not. And the lab grown meat is slop of the lowest order and should not be tolerated here or anywhere else. Um, We've been had says agreed. Massey's one of the few sane people in the room. Also, you says you weren't supposed to notice. Screw Tyson. Agreed. Sean says screw them all. So we're all on the same page about most of the screwing. And good evening to you, Fear Not Farm, down there in Texas. And I'm not trying to do a, um, I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people think of other parts of the country as being more forward leaning when it comes to freedom and independence. The don't mess with Texas, and well, I think Texas is one of the bigger ones. And even some of my dear friends and even channel members in the southern United States, but New Hampshire actually has fewer gun laws and gun regulations than any other state. There may be one or two other states that are equal, but I know they have fewer gun laws than Texas. Granted, at a certain point, it's all kind of, it doesn't actually change the way anybody does things. But New Hampshire, I have to give credit where it's due. New England has a ton of problems, and there's a lot that I don't like about New Hampshire in terms of the way that it's run as a state and more on the town and community levels. But in terms of willingness to go against the grain and be independent, um, you know, New Hampshire does have some real uh, good policies in that regard, and they are open to it. That's, to me, that's what this means, is that in a time when all of our neighbors, it's not like New Hampshire is in an area where our neighbors are on the same page as we are. New Hampshire is like sticking out like a sore thumb in the middle of New England that is all like kissing the behind of the federal government at every possible opportunity, between Massachusetts and Maine is a weird one. I'm not even going to get into Maine, and frankly, I don't understand Maine politics. I'm not clued in there. And same thing goes with Vermont. But I know that, I mean, having come from upstate New York, I have a little bit of familiarity with the way these other states are oriented in the way that they deal with things. And New Hampshire has done a really good job of being very stalwart in maintaining a freedom focused approach to things in a time and literally in a physical place where that is not a popular a popular strategy, a popular viewpoint. And so for them to lead the way on this, it's cracking the door open. And we spend a lot of time in our culture, in our society, having to accept the incremental creep of overregulation, decline, censorship, all of the different things that we just say, well, at least it's happening slowly enough that we can maybe not have to suffer the full consequences of this, and we can kind of just take it and we can live with it until we can't. But for now, for our lifetimes, it'll be okay. It's very rare that we're able to actually take a stand and push back and gain a little ground. And so, what I would say, this should be a hopeful event because a lot of people are black pilled. A lot of people are black pilled, and for good reason. We see, this wall of crap that's coming down on us, and it just pushes and pushes and pushes, and it doesn't matter what we do, and it just keeps pushing. But there are areas where we can push back and we can make those moves and we can get people behind it. And I would argue, and I know that this is never going to be a popular topic. This is not going to be, I'm trying to think of all of the influential political campaigns of recently have all wound up being really cringe in the long run. So maybe that's a good thing. But I think that it's important to gain ground where we can. Because if we gain ground where we can and we build momentum, that's the wedge. It's just like when you're splitting wood, you don't split wood with a sledgehammer and just keep hitting the piece of wood because it's too broad and you don't actually make a dent. You need a sharp edge that is very precise that gets in there. And when you have momentum behind focus, that allows you to actually make inroads and create a wedge and create a divide where you can fill that divide in, and then from that point expand outwards. Now, if you'll pardon my analogy, this actually tracks with what farming represents in terms of family and culture, reality, small business, understanding and relationship with God and the elements around us. All of the things that made America culturally what it was, made it great at one time. It was all things that were anchored and rooted in the small American family farm. And if we can make some strides, because farming is not the big sexy win of like, is it the, which bathrooms the trans people are using? Is it the flags that are flying here? Is it the abortion or the gay marriage? Like the red herring issues that get everybody wrapped around the axle. And I'm not saying that those other issues are insignificant, but what I'm saying is that if there are issues that we can focus on and make an impact and expand farming. Again, I'm not talking about something that's going to change things for the next election cycle or the president after the next one. I'm talking about what will ultimately create the opportunity for a better country 100 years from now when we're all pushing up daisies somewhere, but that we open the door to pioneering a resettlement of our own country by opening the door to small business, small agriculture, family farms, to change the culture, to create food security and strengthen local food economies, that is a foothold, a foot in the door to be able to change everything else, because it has to start somewhere. And the broad approach, look, I'm not a political mastermind, but I would say that what I have seen so far, the broad approach, the come down the center and try to hit them, in the ways that everybody is expecting it, that's not really been very effective, and that's not doing anything. But I think that if we can take little bites out of the pie from a lot of different angles and create some inroads, then you weaken the whole system, the machine, and ultimately create a scenario where you can detach from it safely and supplant the system rather than having to put your focus and effort into banging your head against the system to try to beat it down. You withdraw from the system and you make inroads in and paths around, creating viable alternatives that ultimately lead to detachment from the system and leaving it behind for the betterment of everybody. And I think that theoretically, well, yeah, all this is theoretical, and what do I know? I'm a bozo with funny glasses. Let me jump in the chat here. We've been had says that's sick. Screw spell check. Good. We've been had says no, we haven't had to really push. There's some truth to that because, and of course, I want to try to keep this relatively within terms of service for YouTube purposes, but there are, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, Lord of the Rings says agricultural accelerationism. Exactly right. That is, got to make a bumper sticker or t-shirt with that on it. But like, that really is the point. That really is the point. It's like they are not looking for, and for obvious reasons, because it's never going to happen, I know, but a man can dream here. But come on this journey with me, okay? Imagine a world in which people stop trying to get the president to start doing what they want or suddenly pay attention to your needs instead of whatever APAC tells them, but rather we all go Amish. And not Amish in the sense of actually becoming Amish, but like Amish are basically what most Americans outside of the cities were, 200 years ago. They're just rural and doing their thing. They just maintained their way of life when everybody else changed, and they said, "No, that's it. We're good. We're going to stay here." And if we were to go in that direction, not necessarily go as far as the Amish. I'm not saying that I'm going to start doing smoke signals and turn off all the lights and all that stuff, but like a return to the ways that worked. I think it's a way to create some understanding. It's a way to accelerationism. Ooh, you're on a roll, man. That's good. Accelerationism. I like that. Fear Not Farm says, I think there are 3 things that are way too overregulated. That is meat, eggs, and dairy. Couldn't agree more. Regulation on those and allowing small farmers to get products to market affordably. Yes, 100% agree. And that is why I am super excited about House Bill 396 in New Hampshire, because removing at least the regulations for intra-state sales of meat, so selling to people within your own community, those regulations have been all but completely removed. And this creates a great opportunity for farmers to start making money and to take back some of the market share, because there are a lot of people who, like, how many people do you think go to the grocery store and they got to buy Smithfield bacon, don't look at that and say, all right, throw it in the cart, but whatever. They hold their nose, they put it in the cart, it tastes like bacon, they don't want to think about it. But if they had an alternative where they could go to the farm down the street and buy some bacon, they would do it. And a lot of people would pay a little bit extra per pound of bacon if they were able to see the place where the pigs are raised and they know the farmer. They would do that. And that's not an insignificant thing. And this opens the door for accelerationism. Thank you, Lord of the Ring. I'm going to credit you with that one, but I'm also going to shamelessly steal it. To start working on this type of legislation in other states, because once this is signed into law here, and presumably the state doesn't, evaporate or explode, it's something that could be done elsewhere, and there's a precedent for it. And just like making marijuana legal in California opened the door for Colorado, and then once you get a couple, then it opens up and you get more. And that's where the change can happen. And then really what winds up happening is the Prime Act becomes a federal Capitulation. The Prime Act becomes a federal capitulation where they look and see states like New Hampshire saying, we're doing it our own way. See ya. And they say, yeah, you know what? We've decided that we're not going to make a big deal about it, and you're free to do what you're already doing. Everybody wins, and it's a win at a state level. It's a win for small farms. It's a win for national security, for local communities. It's a win economically because you have more food being produced. Hell, it is a win environmentally. You can even get some of the leftoids on board with this because you're growing animals locally, you're selling them locally, you're not shipping them halfway across the country just to get them cut up and then their carcasses distributed all across the fruited plain by semi truck, and you're also saving money. Like, there's a tremendous amount of benefit. This is the way feeding is supposed to happen. It's not supposed to happen the way it's currently going. This global market is very unnatural, and this is the way things need to go. And I know I'm a little bit giddy here, but this is something that we don't often get wins. I want to savor it. I'm excited about it, and I want this win to be a springboard to get more wins. Because the whole black pill idea is that nothing is good and everything is lost. Well, there are wins in places that maybe we're not looking. And if we really mine those leads to make the progress in the places where progress is available, maybe that progress will give us momentum, because you need momentum to accelerate. Acceleration. This is just fantastic. I'm so happy with this. All right. Sean wants to be Amish. I'm with you, Sean. I'm working my way towards it. I'm not necessarily on board with all their theological stuff, but I could. They have a real. I mean, they stick together. They work together. They have a community that's based on interoperation. Look at the way they put up barns. Like, you could eat off of the floor of their barns because that's all they do, and they are really, really good at it. They're excellent at what they do, and that excellence and that community, like, that's literally what. Sorry, my CGM is beeping at me to tell me that my sugar is high. Oh, that's not too bad. Only 132. Yeah, the excellence and the what we have in the Amish community. See, look. Can you see? Is that reading? Is that, I don't know. That's showing up. Yeah, see, 132. That's my blood sugar. Little high. I kind of cheated. Ate some pizza tonight, and so sue me. It's not that high, but every now and then gotta let my hair down a little bit, live a little. But all of the things that are missing, farming is a way to rebuild a lot of that. And, you know, I want farming to be something that is a viable option for a business. Like, you can be a plumber, you can be a contractor, you can be, a doctor or a nurse or what have you. Well, you can also be a farmer, and that's like a reasonable thing to be able to tell our kids and our grandkids. Whereas right now it's like, well, maybe you can get a job doing HR for Purdue Chicken. That's not exactly a farmer and going out in his bib overalls to slop the hogs and feed the chickens. It's not the same. Like, we need to open those doors, and like, this is how we pioneer. Like, this is modern day pioneering. We're not having to go out and have like tomahawks and arrows flying at us. The tomahawks and arrows are different than they were 300 years ago. There are challenges, and this is what it looks like in our landscape, and we have to stand up and fight in that way, in where the fight presents itself. And I believe that food freedom is a very clearly defined battle line that is going to matter more and more, especially as we see potentially some pending food shortages and with all the nonsense that's going around, abroad. Lord of the Rings says, I wouldn't want to be Amish. We've been had says, with glyphosate now considered necessary to national security, we need more local organic. Yes, agreed. Lord of the Rings says, I wouldn't want to be Amish because then I couldn't record my music, but I admire them. Yeah, I think, we borrow, right? We borrow what we need. I think Amish Amish-ish, right? Like not full Amish, but Amish-ish, right? Um, Fear Not Farm says glyphosate is a national security issue at this point because it would take years to fix the problems we've created with it. Instead of protecting it, though, they should give it a weaning. Fear Not Farm says, I think I would say, though, I would want to see where and how milk or meat is processed before I just trust somebody. Yeah, and I think those are reasonable concerns, and those are things that can be done at a state level or at a local level. The legislation within the state of New Hampshire is that you can sell items that are labeled as not USDA inspected and that they are sold only within the state of New Hampshire. So it's all intra-state commerce. And the idea is that if somebody can buy, like if somebody comes to my farm and wants to buy a pound of bacon, they're welcome to go see how we do things. You can't get much more transparent than that. And there may even be some state regulations and some oversight that happens eventually. Currently, with the way that the bill is written, there's not any of that built in, but it basically puts the onus on the buyer to do the inspection and verification of how their meat and dairy and eggs are being produced. And I think that that's a reasonable trade-off when people are aware that that's what's going on, and also when they're close enough proximity to be able to do this. And it's a different way of doing things, and it's a different way of looking at things, but again, it's pushing the ball in the right direction down the field in terms of responsibility, because instead of saying, hey, there's a federal agency that's going to rubber stamp everything regardless how it actually was treated behind the scenes, it's telling people, hey, look, if you want to buy from somebody in your community, do the legwork, go out there and make sure that you're okay with the way it's being produced, and then have at it. We're going to stay out of your business, as it should be. And if you just say, oh, good enough, I'm going to take it and trust blindly, well, sometimes you get, sometimes you win. What's the guy's name from Big Lebowski? Sometimes you eat the bear, and then sometimes the bear, well, he eats you. But that is a conversation and a principle that needs to be cultivated within our society, and that we do more of that. Sean says, well, let me read through. Sean's just a dirt and pig farmer. What does he know? Weebin Has says, all we need is farmers willing to tell Big Ag to take a hike and run the farm. Fear Not says, one way they could thin soy is to regulate its use directly in human food. That would help wean us off of glyphosate. We should also ban corn syrup in those foods. Would be simple ways to combat the disease. Yeah, that would help with the disease in the human population. That would also help with the amount of agricultural demand that we have on like crop farmers in the West, because we don't need to put soy and corn syrup in everything, and there's so many additives that are going into stuff. It's one of the things. So I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, so hang on to your wigs, folks. In my day job, I am a diabetes educator. Personally, I have lived with type 1 diabetes for 30 years. I did not get it because I ate too much candy as a child. It's a genetic autoimmune condition. And this is what pushed me towards a carnivore diet, because the obvious benefits in terms of metabolic disease, which technically type 1 diabetes is not really metabolic, but it's an autoimmune thing where your body doesn't produce insulin. And so I spend a lot of my days throughout the week talking to people who have been damaged by eating poor diets and try to help them figure out ways to, in short, eat more meat and eat less of everything else. And like, my rule of thumb, especially when I'm talking to an elderly person who isn't going to get a scale and measure and count carbs and read nutrition labels, because I don't do that and I'm half their age. And when I was half my age, I wasn't doing that because I was busy with other things, right? So the rule of thumb is however you normally make your food, twice the meat, half the carbs. And then you have the same dish, but it's going to be better for you. You're going to lose weight. Your blood sugars are going to go down. And then don't eat breakfast. Just wait until noon for your first meal. So you have time restricted eating. Intermittent fasting is the what the kids used to call it. You're doing a modified intermittent fasting type of thing, and you're eating a more protein heavy, and you're just removing a lot of food from your diet. And the reality is, and don't misunderstand what I'm saying, because I'm not trying to be glib, but in a lot of ways, if we had to just go away from industrialized food, and we would consider it a famine. I mean, it would be considered a famine based on the way people are used to eating, where Cheerios, Doritos, bread as it's made in the stores, where these things just went away and were no longer available, and all we could eat was, well, chickens laid a few eggs, and we got a couple of pieces of, we got some sausage from the pigs, we have a ham, we have some pork chops, right? That smaller volume of food would take us back to the way everybody ate for hundreds, thousands of years, and it would actually correct the problem. In some ways, we need a famine, we need a, call it, big hiccup in the system to actually force us into a position where we are eating what we actually were metabolically and biologically designed to eat. 3 meals a day with bread and sweets and juices and fruits and candy and starches and snacks and popcorns and all this trash. There is so much of it. And there's like, you want to simply fix the diseases, the majority of the diseases that I work with and I see every day, like, just only eat 2 meals a day. Not even one. I mean, most people could get by with one decent meal a day if it's got a good amount of protein and fat. Cut it down, 2 meals a day. Just get rid of breakfast, which is always just dessert in the morning, but packaged differently. Because all of the idea of 3 squares a day and all of that, that was all marketing crap that was done somewhere between World War I and World War II to sell more slop to the people in the cities, and it kind of spread. And the further you see that approach progress, people are hungrier and sicker and fatter and weaker and lazier and less capable. And it also, the demands from a farming standpoint are, we need more soy, we need more corn, we need more corn syrup, we need more processing, we need more transportation. When the reality is that it would pinch for a year or two if people were just like, okay, we're going to have a couple of pigs. That's what we're going to eat for meat, maybe a cow. And, we have some apple trees, we eat some apples, grow some potatoes, maybe, but where our consumption could reasonably come down and it would actually have a positive impact on our health. And I am saying this based on the credibility of 30 years of living with and managing type 1 diabetes through a carnivore and fasting dietary approach, which has given me better numbers than any of my doctors can believe. And also just what I deal with on a daily basis now as a certified diabetes and care, CDCES is the acronym that I have as a diabetes educator. But simply just shaving down the amount of calories that we have by a pretty big margin would actually be one of the biggest things that we could do to help ourselves and also reduce some of the strain on the agricultural production. So yeah, I guess that was a long way for saying that. But yeah, cut down on the soy. All right. We've been had says you're paying your auto mechanic $135 an hour. You don't deserve the same. Yeah, no, that's true. It's worth, meat is worth money, and the food is worth money that we produce. I kind of lost where we are. Lord of the Rings talking about Indians. I'm totally with totally unexpected meat. Like, for example, somebody could be at a farmer's market and label processed on farm, and it would be up to you and them. Yeah, exactly. However, if people are transparent and others aren't, obviously one of them is going to be more successful. Yeah, fair. Um, oh, that's Fear Not says, yeah, there is room for skirting those things, but here's the thing, and I don't know if this addresses your question, because basically Fear Not Farm is talking about, well, if you don't have regulatory agencies to, as I understand what you're saying, anyways, I might be getting this a little bit wrong, but basically it creates more opportunity to leave things up to the honesty of people. And if somebody just puts different inspection information on their meats and makes it look like they have a better product, they could be deceptive and wind up being more successful because they're willing to be a little more unscrupulous. And I think that is true. However, in local communities, and I've lived in a few small towns and a few states, and I have seen this as the case here in New Hampshire, both just in town generally and in the farming community. If somebody is doing something that is unethical or unscrupulous, eventually, like, you can't keep that secret for long. And when that comes out, everybody is going to dogpile on you and rat you out, because it's like, hey, this guy, it's self-interested, right? People, just like the guy who's being unscrupulous, is doing it out of their own self-interest, but the people are going to turn around and call that out very readily because they're self-interested and they want to get rid of competition. And so there is a certain level of policing that can happen internally there. And I think the benefits outweigh the costs. It means that if you are going to buy that type of meat, it is up to you to develop a relationship with the farm that you're buying your meat and your eggs from. And without that, it kind of, yeah, there are reasonable concerns that you present. I'm with you on that, but it also creates the opportunity for people to just develop a relationship with the farm and then just get their meat that way, but they can get it piecemeal as it works for them financially, because that still is a big market share compared to the share of the market that will buy an entire pig and pay for that all up front and store that whole pig in their garage, in their chest freezer. Like, just going, the people who are actually going to build a relationship and take advantage of this appropriately, it's big gain for everybody there. Lunch. So I got a couple other things. Fear Not asks, in your opinion, can type 2 be reversed in some cases? So type 2 diabetes can be put into remission. I would say that in some cases, yeah, but in a lot of cases, it depends, because there's a lot of different hormonal switches that are going on that can create an elevation in blood sugar. And it's not all you ate too much sugar. There's a lot of things like stress, lack of sleep, um, depending on adrenaline signals from like your adrenal glands and other hormones that your body produces. These are all things that can have massive impacts on your blood sugar levels without you putting a single thing in your mouth. Like, for example, if you were to wear a blood sugar sensor, when you wake up first thing in the morning, you're lying in bed, you check your sugar, let's say it's 90, which is about normal for fasting blood sugar. You get up and go take a leak, and you walk around and you start making coffee, you look at your blood sugar again, it's 130. Because when you wake up, your liver thinks, okay, we got work to do, and your liver dumps a bunch of sugar out for you to use as energy to go out and do stuff, because your liver hasn't gotten the memo that actually we live in a developed society now where we don't really need to store that sugar. Your liver is like, okay, game on. Like, you might have to run from a saber-toothed tiger, so here's some sugar, and then your sugar goes up. So in short, yes, in some cases, I think that type 2 diabetes can be put into remission in some cases. I think a lot of it has to do with how strict somebody is able to be with their diet and how active they are willing to be in addition, because the diet is the first step, the exercise is the second step, and you can't really get there without both. Like if you're just really active, but you eat a not so great diet, um, you're going to be kind of stuck. If you are and correcting your sleep and your like sleep hygiene and your stress hormones, that's a big part of it as well. It's not just about insulin and sugar. You kind of have to get the whole picture intact because your body produces cortisol. I'm sure most people have heard of that. And when you're not sleeping, it's a stress hormone that makes your liver like dump sugar, because your liver stores a bunch of sugar, but your liver is always thinking about, okay, well, I just want to help, and you seem like you're upset. That means when you're upset, well, you got to run from a saber-toothed tiger. Here, have some more sugar. And it also kind of sets up the stress hormones that makes your sugar stay in your bloodstream more, rather than your cells being open and being able to take that out. So when it comes to exercise, one of the biggest things that I recommend is, I mean, certainly as we age, we want to maintain muscle mass, so eating enough protein, but it doesn't require a ton of protein. Like they say, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. You don't have to eat that much. That's like the bodybuilding trope. Um, you don't need to eat that much protein to maintain your muscle mass, especially as you age. But walking, like taking 10-minute walks throughout the day where you're just walking, not like I had to walk to my car or I had to walk from this field to that field. Certainly being active is, part of it, but where you're actually walking. And this is something that I do very poorly with, because since I started farming, I don't really have time to work out, go for a walk, do much else. I'm kind of like always running, and I keep trying and telling myself that I am going to get better at doing that, because it's sad that the farmers are some of the most unhealthy people, because they're under a ton of stress and their diets are just like, I need something quick that I can eat. So grab a can of Pringles and a Snicker bar and a Mountain Dew and hop on the tractor, and I'm eating, and unfortunately that's what we see a lot. And yeah, so yeah, it can be done. We've been had says makes perfect sense. More protein, less carbs. Who doesn't love a burnt steak? Yeah, well, black and blue, right? Burn on the outside, light on the inside. Cavemen ate better than the average American. And part of that was because the caveman didn't have other things to put into his system to spike the insulin. Because what happens is when you eat a handful of Doritos, that shoots your blood sugar up, which then your pancreas spikes the insulin to bring your blood sugar down. Great. So your blood sugar is going down, so you're not like going sky high, but insulin is a hunger that is directly related with our sensation of hunger. Is a hormone. Sorry. Insulin is a hormone that is directly connected to our sensation of hunger. So as our insulin levels spike, for good reason, to regulate our blood sugar, which is a good thing that it's regulating our blood sugar, but it puts us on the glucoaster, because now as the blood sugar comes down and that insulin is really kicking in, oh geez, well, you know what, I'm kind of hungry, let me have a little snack before I go to bed. I'm going to have a bowl of ice cream, and then you have that and you fall asleep, and then all of that just gets turned directly into fat because you're not burning any of it off. Insulin is going to spike again. And then of course, what happens first thing in the morning? Well, you wake up and it's just like, man, I still feel kind of full because I didn't eat that long ago, but I still feel hungry. So you know what, I'll just have an English muffin, I'll just have a donut, I'll just have some cereal, right? Spikes the insulin, you're riding the glucoaster. And so just pulling away from those carbs down regulates our production of insulin, so we don't have as much insulin in there, because insulin is a necessary tool, but too much of a good thing. Like, it's not just about your blood sugar levels. And when you go to the doctor, they're measuring your blood sugar. They're not actually measuring how much insulin you had to produce to get good blood sugar. That's the thing that people totally miss, because I have patients that come in that weigh, sometimes like 300-400 pounds, and they're not like, 6'8" and athletics 300 pounds, right? You have people that are vastly overweight And it's like, well, my blood sugar looks good. I'm not diabetic. So, hey, big deal. And it's like, yeah, the reason why you are corpulent is because of the fact that your body is working overtime to produce a huge amount of insulin, and that keeps your blood sugar levels down. But all of that insulin in your system, that is putting you in a anabolic state. Anabolic to build, catabolic breaking down. So you're constantly building, and you're not building muscle unless you're in the gym. So what are you building? You're building fat, but you're not diabetic because, hey, my numbers look good. Well, yeah, you need to lower that amount of insulin, and then everything will start to fix itself. Who are the strongest people in history, and what was their diet? That's a tough one. I don't know. Depends on who you ask. Vikings? No, Vikings. I don't think too many people were actually vegan when it mattered. Less meals, more metabolizing. Yes, 100% agree. And I would stake my professional reputation on that exact thing. More protein, fewer carbs, fewer meals, less stuff, and higher quality will improve many, many, many things. Less meals, more metabolizing. We've been had says, when I was old enough after helping raise the calves to cows, I was taken to the slaughterhouse to see dinner. Yeah, that's how the sausage gets made. It's a good part of farming is that people are forced to confront reality. And guys, I am going to be winding the stream down here shortly. So get last questions, and I'm going to try to catch up with the chat before I bid you guys farewell, because I want to have a little time here left for the family. And we got a busy day tomorrow. A lot of stuff going on. Cleaning out the barn. You might have seen my post that I made on, YouTube post. I have no fertilizer shortage here. Cleaning out the barn, there is a surplus of fertilizer. Doesn't help the farmers in Iowa, but my barn is full of feces. Fear Not Farms says, always amazes me with various ailments how little people are willing to try to do themselves. I think as a nation we're addicted to medications, and I understand a lot of people have to have them, but if there was a chance at all, I don't understand why people don't work towards not needing it. Yeah, it's ironic and sort of sad. We've really seen, and this is something that I think like the boomers were raised to really trust doctors, and that got us the last pandemic, and that completely eroded that element of trust that the medical profession had, where more and more people are starting to scratch their head and say, hey, wait a minute, like it would be better to just not need the medication. And really, it's I mean, I completely agree. Like modern medicine does not really do much to prevent the problems. It just medicates the problems. And the problem is that modern medicine is really good if you need surgery on something or if you break something. But when it comes to maintenance, that is done lifestyle and diet. And most of the time, by the time people get to the hospital where they're talking to me, they've already stacked several decades up where they have been not paying attention to any of that. And at that point in the game, it's like, and I don't want to get off on the GLP-1s and the Ozempics and all of that stuff, but there's some patients when they're 85 years old, I don't want to put them on an insulin regimen. I'll put them on a GLP-1. I mean, I don't prescribe myself, but I'll recommend a GLP-1 medication because at that age, that's going to give them the best results and for their situation. And you kind of reach a point where you can't just, eat more tuna and eat more steaks and go out for a jog, a couple of times a week. When you've been doing it wrong for decades and decades and decades, you're kind of painted into a corner. So, all right. NS Ghost says, if you go for a walk after you eat, drastically cuts blood sugar. Yep. And your insulin doesn't go up 20 minutes, much better than working out later. Yeah. That's like the half the carbs, double the protein. That's my um, quick synopsis of dietary recommendations for oldsters. And then the other one is 10-minute walks, specifically after every meal. If you can do that, it makes a draft. And like I can see, like when I like, because I have my blood sugar on the on my CGM, and right now I'm running a little high. I need to take some insulin, but I'm like at 160. I don't know if you can even see any of that, but anyways, um, like I can see where my blood sugar is going, and I can track it, and I can see when I take a shot of insulin and go for a um, you know go for a walk, I can see what that does. Hung like Tic Tacs. Now there is a fella I have not seen in a while. Good to see you, man. I still have that knife of yours. It's in my garage. Man, I haven't seen you in a minute, and that has to be one of the best. Has to be one of the best usernames. And yes, we are doing our best to live up to the live free or die, since we spent a considerable amount of our time in the last couple of years introducing all kinds of silly legislation that kind of doesn't help with that. I know let's see, I'm trying to catch up here. Alcohol and blood sugar. Um, yeah, alcohol would be my weak spot. Quit alcohol after the coof. Drinking was the only thing we were allowed to do. Fear Not says Jesus drank a pint of wine a day. I think historically, though, they diluted it down to about 4%. Uh, yeah, some interesting conversation. Um, okay, yeah, let me cycle off of some of the dietary stuff here, because I did say that I was going to address some of this stuff with NS Ghost, just to talk a little bit about the difference between the Burks and the Mangalitsa's. So I will tell you that my experience, sorry guys, taking a hard right turn into the world of pigs just for a moment as we are wrapping up here. Um, Mangalitsa's, I've done and worked with and butchered manga crosses, like manga crossed with old spots, which are both mangas, obviously, are definitively lard pigs, lardy pigs. Old spots are heritage breed, but kind of on the border there with lardy breeds. Um, my personal experience was that the meat was not any better than any of the other breeds of pigs that I've raised, and that they did an okay job of foraging, but I didn't notice anything different with the amount they foraged versus the amount of grain that my other pigs had eaten in the past. So I think that if you are only raising mangas and you are looking at it from an angle of like complete self-sufficiency, homestead type of a thing, I think the Mangalit, and also you like pig fat, and you're gonna make what do they call it? There's a dish that they make, or like a cured meat that they make from pig fat. But there's a handful of different things. You make the lard, and um, it's like it's good quality meat, but it's not as meaty. So you get smaller chops and you get more fat, and the fat is very good. But to me, aside from a scenario where I felt like I was going to have to raise meat for my family, so at a small scale without trying to do it quickly or with financial interests in mind, if I was raising meat for my family and I was concerned about not having access to grain or feed, a Mangalitsa, American Guinea Hog, Mulefoot, any of those breeds, although mangas are the only ones that I have direct experience raising, that's the situation in which I think that they would shine. Now, there are different people here who have different experiences with this, who might give you different advice, but my opinion is that they were not super remarkably different from any of the other pigs that I've had, other than they were fattier, they grew slower, and they had less meat. but there's no magic to the breed. And again, take it for what it is worth. I don't really believe in breed magic. It's really comes down to how well adapted the breed is for what you're doing. So if you're raising Mangalitsa's and you have good quality hay and nutritionally dense forage that you can provide them with, and you are able to feed them separately from the rest of, like, let's say you have heritage or other normal, for lack of a better term, pigs, that you're separating them out and not trying to feed them all the same ration, because if you feed them all the same ration, you're either going to calibrate towards the mangas that need very little grain, and then the mangas will do okay, more forage, very little grain, and then your other pigs are going to be very lean and not growing as fast. Or you're going to say, I want my normal pigs to grow better, and then you're going to grain them harder, and the mangas are going to eat that grain, which metabolically they're not really predisposed to, and they're just going to get fat. And then you're going to have this much fat and this much loin in your chop, and it doesn't feel great getting those kind of returns. But the meat is good. But I don't think that, like, if you're not happy, and I would say this 9 times out of 10, if you're not happy with the way your meat tastes or the carcass quality, 9 times out of 10, it's not the breed that needs to change. It might be some of the breeding, but usually, and I know I like trying different breeds just because it's fun. So I'm not discouraging you from that, but I'm just the facts. I don't think that the breed is going to be the determining factor there. So, all right, yeah, hung like Tic Tacs. I have used your knife. It's not sitting there idly. It's in, like, right on my workbench. So, but it's funny. I think about you every time I use that knife. I'm like, hey, I remember him. And here you are. So that's cool. Everything comes full circle, right? Bellino's Bounty says the addiction to medication really goes to the issue with modern American culture. You can't be doing anything wrong. No, it's clearly something out of your control by this. Yeah, 100%. Fear Not says, I was looking at a property thinking of adding to my farm, and the house was much worse than I thought. And they were not that old. A bunch of them died. Couldn't help but notice a 10-foot stack of pop cans. Yeah, that's, I mean, people are eating themselves into the grave, unfortunately. And Hung Like Tic Tacs was just reading up on the Prime Act, and the Prime Act is a good start. It doesn't go nearly far enough, but it's basically, if House Bill 396 that New Hampshire just passed, just to catch you up, if that legislation gets adopted by 2 or 3 more states, the Prime Act is basically going to be like, okay, yeah, we'll let you do your thing because you're already doing it. And that's what needs to happen. The federal government should always be supporting the states, not forcing the states into compliance. That, I mean, just in terms of the way the government should work, right? Fear Not Farm says, I'm leaning towards doing some lard pigs, Mangalitsa's, or Maishon for my pen hogs, and going full on top for pasture pigs. But the value of lard is where I would use those two. Yeah, I've heard really good things about the Maishons. To me, I don't like the way they look, so I'm not raising Maishons. I know that's very superficial, but like, I want to look at my pigs and think, oh, you're precious, you're cute. And I can't look at a Maishon and think that. Like, to me, they just look, they're not cute. I mean, it's more, yeah. Sorry, I dug myself in a hole and revealed myself for the superficial bozo that I am. The glasses should have tipped you off. I'm just a dingus. But yeah, I can't see myself raising Maishons, but I have heard really good things about them. So I would be interested definitely to hear what your experience is with them, though. We've Been Had says they are pumping the ads on your show here. Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Bring on those ads, and make sure you like the stream, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So yeah, the little bit of a little bit of, you know, ad money is what we take what we can get here because we do not have large corporate sponsors at this time. So, I'll make maybe 50, 75 cents off of a live stream like this. I do it because I like hanging out with you guys. I like chatting and I like having a little bit more of a conversational tone. Um, I will say as we wrap up, first of all, I want to thank the channel members because Mr. Lightfoot, who I have not seen chime in the chat, one of our first channel members, he actually gave me the light that is literally illuminating my ugly mug here on stream for you guys and the channel memberships. That adds a little bit of funding to what we're doing so that we can continue to make these videos and keep this stuff going. And for a couple bucks a month, you can kick in and support if that's something that you're open to doing. If not, just watch, like, comment, stay tuned. Anytime you guys have questions that you want me to make videos about, I am happy to do that. I love getting questions and ideas from people who are actually watching my videos. I think one of the things I'm going to try to do better is not make all of my videos quite so search relevant and topical, but rather just to be a little bit more vlog-y, where I'm just bringing people along with what I'm doing on the farm at any given point in time. And certainly there will be educational components within that, but right now I kind of structure everything based around, okay, if I'm talking to somebody who just got their first set of pigs and they want to know how to do X, Y, or Z. And I think that there's a time and place for those videos, but end of the day, I only know so much. And I also want to just make videos that are going to reach a wider audience of people, because kind of the reason why I'm on here, certainly to commiserate with other people who are doing this and to talk and share information, but also to try to like reach more people with what we're doing who maybe don't own pigs, probably would never own pigs, but are like, oh, that's interesting. Huh. Let me see what this bozo's up to. And being able to reach those people, right, instead of preaching to the choir, where we can reach more people, that's kind of what I want to be able to do, in addition to being able to actually give good concrete information to people who are doing this alongside me, and that we can, build each other up and have that community. So it's it's a learning experience. It's a learning process, because there's only so much time in the day, and I need to make sure that I'm not burning myself out. So I'll do as much as I can, and the more support that I have, the more time that I'm able to devote to doing this. Granted, there's a tipping point where that happens, but yeah, attention is the currency of the internet. That's very true. 50 cents right now, but let's see what those numbers are next year. So much growth ahead. Yes, thank you, Mike. And I appreciate your being here as well, Mike and Anna. They came to a couple of my classes that I do here. Homestead. We do a Homestead Pigs 101 class for folks that are just getting started. And ironically, they're buying property. They were already buying property. They didn't decide to buy property near me because of the YouTube. They thought I'm pretty sure about that. But they actually wound up coming to one of my classes, and we became friends. And Mike's helped me do some work in the barn, and you know, building community and meeting folks that are more local. And Craig, I don't know if he's in here. Fear Not Farm. I'm sorry. I know you're not nearby me. Secret Noise Pictures, if he's still in here. He's just next state over, a little further adjacent in Vermont, but he's relatively close. So there's more folks who are making some connections, building stuff here, and yeah, we've definitely come a long way in the last year, and it's a snowball. It's a cumulative effect. So I'm trying to play the long game here. I'm not worried about getting everything done immediately. I want to build a community and build relationships with you guys that are taking the time to care about what I'm doing when it's small and not sexy or popular. and try to maintain that. And then when it's ready to sprout and grow wings and, hit a bigger audience, well, eventually that day hopefully will come, and I'm just going to play around and do different things and see um, what I enjoy doing that feels authentic, that I can do consistently. Because that's one of the big things. One of the reasons why the talking head sort of educational style of videos, as you can probably tell, since it's been 2 hours and 4 minutes, almost 2 hours and 5 minutes, I haven't come up for breath maybe once or twice in this time. I don't have a hard time speaking. And so educational type of stuff is, I can like rattle it off. I just look at a couple of outlines on a piece of paper, and there, that's it. So it's easy for me to do that. And so I make the video types that I can do a decent amount of, because I don't want to just do like one really cool Casey Neistat type of vlog, but it takes me a month to edit that one video. And then everybody's like, completely moved on and lost track by the time I make another one. So it's a matter of finding balance of what works for you guys and what is going to work for me from a production standpoint. But I would love to, well, let me know what you think as you see new videos coming out, as you see different styles of content that over the next couple of months. I value hearing from you guys, because the people that hang out for 2 hours and are still in the chat, those are the people that I take your opinions and your suggestions very seriously, believe it or not. And NS Ghost says, you're in New Hampshire. We're moving there after we sell. That is cool. I would love to chat with you at some point, and maybe, well, I would love to have you somewhere near. That would be really cool, because more community that we can get closer, get more like-minded people closer together. That would be cool. So yeah, would love to have you up here, and let's talk about that at some point. We're in Charlestown, which is like kind of 3/4 of the way down, right off the Connecticut River, right on the western edge of the state. There's some stuff around here. I mean, nothing's cheap in New Hampshire, but stuff can be had. So it just, you got to wait a little bit and wheel and deal a little bit, but stuff can be gotten. So, and it's a really nice area if you have any interest in agriculture. Lots of woods and stuff too. So you're not like, it's not all farmland as such, but there's a lot of rural and semi-rural wooded areas up here where you can do a lot of different things with trees and plants and animals and fishing and hunting, and in addition to just like whatever domesticated stuff. Anyways, folks, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this live stream. Please like, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave your comments. Let me know kind of what you guys are thinking about. And again, I value your input and your feedback. Those of you that take the time to, actually be part of what we're doing here. So I'm looking forward to what comes next, and growing with you guys. So thank you very much, and we will see you guys on the next stream, which will presumably be next Friday. I don't know what I'm going to be talking about then, but stay tuned. And if you guys have questions or comments, you have different ideas, hey, give me a holler, and maybe, you can set the tone for what we talk about. I had somebody ask me on Facebook about the qualities that I look for in a breeding boar. It was an interesting question, because some of it is just hit and miss, but we'll have to see. Good night, Bellino's Bounty. Weebin Has just found your website. We're in southeast New Hampshire, but have connections over yonder. Well, cool. Well, maybe come see us sometime. We'd love to meet. It's always cool when, like, I always thought of YouTube as something that casts a wider net. And so it's always surprising to me to hear that, like, there's folks that I'm making friends with on YouTube who are actually more local, because I don't really do much on Facebook. And to me, Facebook always felt more like a local thing. But I've made a lot of good local friends here just doing these streams and all that jazz. So cool. All right, guys. Y'all have a good night. And we will see you guys on the next live stream. Extreme close up here to end the stream. And good night and God bless.